My name is Brian Monroe. I'm a Fedora ambassador, and I'm an assistant administrator at UC Santa Barbara, recovering music major, and that's why I'm here. Kind of blending two things that I love, music and Linux and open source stuff. So welcome to Pro Audio Keyboards from Scratch. This is not the mechanical kind of keyboard, so if you're here for that, I'm sorry. I know we all have at least probably, one person we know, if not many that we know that use like blue cap keyboards that could be percussive instruments with how loud they are, but that's not what we're focusing on. We are focusing on like music keyboards, like the actual older one. So let's just talk about like goals and scope for today, what we want to get into. I'm hoping that you kind of know about Linux already, right? That you're familiar with it. I'm going to go over some distro-specific stuff with Fedora, but I'm keeping it broad. So broad strokes, right? Things that are going to be true no matter what your preferred distro is. Just want to kind of demystify some of the apps, some of the settings, things that are going to set you up for success, and kind of enable you as an artist. And then like hopefully C, we're missing an adapter. It'll either be here or it won't. It'll be great either way, because we can all still hear the sounds that are going to be played. So, and then hopefully just be inspired as artists. Right? That's one of my goals for today. So, stuff to buy from scratch, right? Because I don't expect you all to like go and wire up your own MIDI keyboards or anything like that. So, things that you need. You need some sort of compute device, whether that's like an old laptop or a desktop or a Raspberry Pi or whatever it is that you want to run. But you need some sort of computer with Linux installed on it. You also need, there's an asterisk here, you need some sort of dedicated audio card. It's probably going to be USB. They vary in size, in capabilities, in price. The one like on the top left up there is like $9,000. Probably don't need that one. The one on the top right is like $3 on eBay. You don't want that one. The one on the bottom is I think around $100. Something like that would work well. The Scarlett Pro Audio. So when I say almost all of them that are out there that are kind of probably in that reasonable price range, right, are actually USB 2 devices. Even like mine, I've got mine right here. It's a Focusrite. It's a little bit bigger than the one that's pictured, but it's got USB-C, but it's actually still a USB 2 device. They do that because it's cheaper, the latency is a little bit lower. They know it's compatible with everything, so. That is one reason for it. So, but why do you need one, right? So you have your DAC, your digital audio conversion. Do you want to trust that process to a 10-cent, we added it on to our motherboard to say that we had it thing, or do you want to ensure, right, because Pro Audio, that you have something that's dedicated, that's going to be working well? Most of these devices have like their own clock sync. So to make sure that digital audio conversion is right, exactly, right? It's on board. So that's one of the reasons that you want it. The other thing is your preamp. Preamps aren't terribly important when it comes to playback, like for synthesis. But if you want to really do it from scratch, where you're recording your own samples, 1000% necessary. You don't want to trust that process of bringing something up from mic level to line level in your recording to a throwaway, 10-cent thing that we tacked on to our motherboard. You want it to be as high quality as you can afford within reason, right? That's why you want it. But how do you know which one to buy, right? The key word that you can look for to find out if it's going to work with Linux or not is class compliance. Is it a class compliant device? If the answer is yes, very good chance, unless they're lying, it's happened, very good chance that it's going to work fine in Linux. You can also like Google, this device plus Linux, and it'll pop up. But if you're not sure and it's not mentioned, which most of them aren't, you can look for that class compliance. Is it a class compliant device? And you kind of want those anyways, because it means less drivers. So even if you're using it, end up using it on a different distro or a different operating system like Windows or Mac or whatever, you'll know it'll work because it's a class compliant device. So we have that. The next thing is going to be like what you're actually playing on, your MIDI keyboard. And there's a ton of different options with that too. So how many options there are and what you need is totally up to you as an artist, right? So MIDI is a standard. It sends note on, note off signals with velocity attached to it on different channels. They just came out with MIDI 2. There's not really a lot of MIDI 2 devices. Almost none of the software knows how to use it yet. So don't worry about that. So at least not for right now. Most of them are going to connect to your computer over USB as well. You'll see up there in kind of that top picture, right, there's like that knobs section. So there are two different types of knobs that you're looking for when you're choosing a MIDI controller. Which one is much cheaper than the other. There's like normal potentiometer. It's like a normal pot that you can turn it all the way up and then it stops, and you turn it all the way down, and that's it. Nothing special, nothing fancy. There's also rotary encoders, which will you can tell if it has it, it just keeps spinning forever. And so instead of saying, here's where I'm at the halfway mark, it just says, hey, I've bumped the message up. So if you're doing something that requires like lots of patch changes, where those values are being maybe controlled not by you, the performer, but more by your software, those rotary encoders are really useful because you're not going to suddenly jump from, the value 20 to value 111 because, the keyboard shook a little bit and it moved, because that can happen. The other thing is, though, there's also, depending on your software, there's also a thing that's called catch-up. So not like ketchup, but catch, like I'm going to grab you. So if you have it set to 127, which is like the max value for MIDI, it won't change the value until it gets that value from your controller. So it means you have to turn all the way up, and then you can adjust it. So just be aware, something to be aware of. Think about your performance, think about what you need, think about what's going to work for you. The faders that are there, sometimes people call them sliders. Some of them on some keyboards are motorized, right? So when you make a change, they all jump, and it looks really awesome and cool, and you feel special, and it costs about 8 times more. For some people, you may not care, right? And it's also good to know that the faders can also have what's called a drawbar setting. It just depends on your keyboard, where the zero volume, like an organ, is all the way up, and as you pull it down, it increases, so it's like flip-flopped. So just be something to be aware of if that's something that you want, just to think about. Those are some of the settings. The pads, similarly, a lot of times people call them drum pads. Traditionally, are actual notes. It's like an extra key on the keyboard that are like synced with drum sounds. Not all keyboards do the actual note setting. So some of them will allow you to assign control values to it, which means you can tie that drum pad to a reverb or an LFO or some sort of envelope, whatever it is that you want to put it to. And some of them are touch sensitive. So it's not just you've hit it once, it's as you push into that push into that pad, the value goes up, and so you can be like, there's some reverb, and there's a lot of reverb, and then not, right? Or you can like even manually give it time. So if that's something that sounds cool or interesting that you would want to use, you have to look for a device that has that. And it's also good to know that, like especially that top section gets sold as a MIDI controller all the time without any of the actual keyboard part. So think about that as you're looking for stuff. Maybe you buy a cheap one or buy two, or whatever it is that you're looking for. You don't have to be limited to one particular device. You can mix and match kind of as you go along, which kind of brings us to expression and sustain pedals. Not all keyboards have them. You probably want minimum, for pro audio, you minimum want a sustain pedal. That's just to keep that note, right? You push down on the pedal and the note will continue for forever, hopefully, until you let go. The expression pedal is like, right, like a volume or a wah or whatever. You can assign it to whatever you want it to be, but toe forward, all the way up, heel back, all the way off. And some keyboards also have additional pedals if you're an actual pianist, like I am not, right, for the soft pedal, the damp pedal. So if you want all three pedals, you need to make sure that your keyboard supports that. So it's just something to look for. And then there's also size. Big part of size is like if you're playing organ, an organ traditionally is 61 keys. If you're a pianist, you need 88 keys. There's really no way to get around that if you want to really play a piano, or have someone else play a piano for you on your recording or for funsies. And part of that too is also, there's two more things. There's also weighted keys. So fully weighted keys have a hammer action, similar to a piano or an actual Rhodes where there's something going and striking a pad. So they're weighted, so it takes extra weight. If they're not weighted, it feels like a Casio. It's just, it's a spring. It's all it is, right? And it won't feel right. A real pianist won't be able to play the way that they need to. So if that's important to you, it's good to know. And there's also semi-weighted, which is something in between, right? Your mileage may vary. And then there's also aftertouch, which is something where you push down harder on the keys and it triggers aftertouch, the aftertouch signal, which is just kind of on-off. But you can use it for a lot of cool stuff like triggering a Leslie speaker, right? Instead of having a break, having to worry, I just push harder and the sound starts spinning. And it's easy and I like it and it's fun. So yeah. So we talked about that. You need a MIDI keyboard. You also need like a stand. You need a sustain pedal, which looks kind of like this, right? For the nicer ones, like the cheaper ones are just like a thing that you stomp on. They don't look as fancy. Either one works great. They cost anywhere between $5 and $100, depending on how many you need or have. And so just talking about this setup that's here, this is an old laptop from at least 2015, probably 2014. It's got Fedora 37 on it. It's the Jam lab that's on it. It's got a Scarlett USB, and it's audio, but I didn't bring it. But it just has an Alesis 61 key keyboard, not very expensive. It's one of the cheaper ones you can buy with, a couple of options on it. So that's what this rig is. It's like nothing fancy, nothing special, nothing new. Mostly kind of stuff that you can find. You can probably find it on eBay, probably find it used, and use it. So the next thing that you would need to do, right, is install all the things. And so part of the easy way of installing all the things is to, just go to labs.fedoraproject.org. You can download the JamLab. It's that one right there that has all the arrows pointed to it. That'll like pre-install and pre-set up a bunch of stuff for you. There's nothing special about like the packages. They exist in normal Fedora. You don't have to reinstall to get any of this. It just has the KDE desktop and a couple of other things. Jack, right? Ardor, Carla. There's a bunch of CAF and Studio plugins that you're going to want to use to like really narrow in your sound. There's a pre-existing audio user group that's set up. That's kind of important. We'll cover that in a little bit. And but most importantly, there's a full preamp kernel that's available with Fedora. There's a couple of things that you're going to want to probably install, at least for the sake if you're following along, like watching this later on. SFizz is a sampler that is like for keyboards and stuff. It does the SFZ, like sound font Z format for sampling, which we'll talk a little bit about later. So this is how you install it. It's 2 commands, right? DNF, you enable this copper repo, and then you install SFizz. It's pretty easy. And then there's another organ synth that plugin that I kind of like that I'm going to use. It's not officially in the Fedora Jam thing, but that might change soon. I'm probably going to submit it as one of the package lists. And so those are just 2 kind of extra things that aren't included in there, but it's all pretty simple. So the next thing that we need to talk about is scheduling. Scheduling is, and kind of like this real-time kernel is like what drives most of the latency that people have issues with running Linux, or I'll just say with running audio through electronic devices in general. And what the right setting is really depends on your application. I'm always reminded of this great story. I emailed the Fedora music list asking about this, and the chair from the Stanford music department emailed me back in 2 hours with a really long explanation. But his requirements, he's like, oh no, you absolutely need a real-time kernel because that's the only way to get less than a millisecond of latency. And that was really important to him. But I mean, I don't go to Stanford, and nor do I perform there. But for his thing with performing, with electronic devices with orchestra, essential. They needed it. Which kind of brings us to this talk about real-time kernels versus preemptive real-time kernels versus just your stock kernel. What is it that you need? And so this real-time kernel involves you have to get a patch, or you have to find a distro that compiles the patch and all the headers that you need for you. If you want to do all that work, you can. I know CentOS has one, so you could absolutely do that. There's other distros that do it as well. The full preemptive kernel is going to work for most use cases, I would say. It's probably good enough. But you probably don't want the stock one, mostly because I'll just say it's so easy to get the full preemptive kernel. Most of it's just a configuration issue. The difference in milliseconds per time, right, is logarithmic, right? It's by order of magnitudes of 10, right? With a real-time kernel, you can get a 0.5 millisecond latency. With a preemptive, you can probably get at least a 5 millisecond. I was talking to someone earlier. They just bought a new device, they got theirs down to 2. But if you're like running stock on old hardware, you're looking probably at least 15 milliseconds. And I say this in like there are thresholds without getting into X runs. X runs audibly sound garbage. Like it's just like this sound that sounds awful, and you would never want it to happen in a live performance ever. Like it's the worst case scenario. If you record at home, it's not a big deal, right? Because you're like, oh, that sounded awful. Let's do another take. And no one will know. It was just you being annoyed. But if you're in front of like a live audience, you never want to have it to happen. And part of the reason why I say like the preemptive is probably good enough to put this in perspective. There's about 1.3 milliseconds of delay per foot away you are from a sound device, right? So being, 9 feet away from your amp, your guitar amp, and you're chugging, you're already at a 15 millisecond delay. So you can think about that. And you can think about, well, yeah, but I need to be precise because I'm a performer. Think of French horn players, right? French horn players, they blow through 40 feet of tube, right? And then the bell is facing the wrong way, and so they actually have to start their notes way earlier than they need to so that the sound bounces off the back wall and then hits the conductor at the right time so they don't get yelled at. That's a lot of delay. So you can compensate for kind of some of these other things. And I would encourage, like, especially for like live performances, maybe think about giving yourself a little bit more, the difference between 2 milliseconds and 3. If 3 is stable, please choose 3 every time. You know what I mean? Like just let it be stable. That's not that much difference. That's like playing drums and then putting your ear next to the snare drum and playing drums. It'll be okay. You'll be all right. So if I convinced you on the full preempt, there's a couple of things that we need to configure for that. One of those things is updating the kernel. So we can do this with this grubby command, update kernel all, args preempt equals full. I think by default, Fedora is preempt versus equals request. So this isn't really like a huge change. They're actually talking about making it a default. There's an open ticket for it. But who knows, based off of whatever distro, you'll just have to find out. You normally, like with Grub, you can hit the E key as you're booting and look at the Grub line and see whatever the default is. So if you see the default in there is preempt equals full, you're probably good. You don't need to do anything else. If not, you can use something like Grubby or something else. You can edit it in manually every time you boot to go do music stuff. That's fine too. The other thing you need to do is add yourself to the audio group. That's what this user mod is doing. So your user is whatever your user is called, right? Who am I? So adding yourself to the audio group, in Fedora, like this would actually work. You actually have an audio group. It doesn't really matter what you can rename it to, sound awesomeness group, right? It can be kind of whatever you want to, but the idea is just to put yourself into a group that is also, if there is a group, things that are related to audio can get escalated, and when you set this next part, this conf file, the security limits.d.audio.conf, that file doesn't exist. You're just making it up. It's audio because it's part of the audio group. And you're adding these 2 lines, right? At audio can request real-time priority, right? You can ask for that. That number can be higher or lower depending on your distro or your hardware or other stuff. I think Jack recommends it at 95. This has been working for me, all right? So it's just to make sure that those audio sources are more important, that it's going to handle those things and more immediately, and it'll let your Wi-Fi hang for a minute, because that's not what's important in that performance setting, right? And then also allowing the memory lock to be unlimited. So that's really important for being able to request enough memory to run your samples. Sampling is like one of those things that is definitely, if you want something to sound like the instrument, you probably need to use a sample of it or go record your own. Synthesis only gets us so far. There are some things, because of the nature of how those instruments were created, like the B3 tone wheel organ, the synthesis can sound very close to the actual instrument because they kind of used analog synths to kind of make it in the first place, so it works. But there are other instruments like pianos or strings or, cowbell that you need to have an actual recording of that thing. And when you start talking about, full set of 88 keys worth of samples at a high quality, that's a lot of memory. It's a lot of WAV files. And so you do want that request to be able to be unlimited. So the last thing is Jack. Did we ever get an adapter? Maybe? All right. Sorry, would it help if you... it'll be all right. No, it'll be okay. Running with Jack, one of the big things is kind of... let's come back. I think the thing that trips people up the most is those two lower buttons that are there, right? There's Connect and Patch Bay. And if you've been around Pro Audio a long time, you use a patch bay to connect things. And so it doesn't really make sense, a whole lot of sense in your mind. You're saying, I want to connect things. I need the patch bay. You don't want the patch bay. You do want to open up the connect window. It's a really straightforward, simple GUI that lets you go in and grab whatever it is that whatever apps you have running, you can connect in between. So Linux's approach to how things should have worked really started off with Jack, in the sense of kind of like a lot of other things. They're like, let's not try to make the world's best everything app, right, and put it under, I hate this term, under a single pane of glass, right, because people have opinions, because let's face it, Linux people have opinions, Try to tell someone that Vim and Vi are the same thing, and there will be someone to talk your ear off for 30 minutes about how they're absolutely not the same thing, and how dare you, So we say, well, we have all these users that want all these different things. Jack is kind of how they've solved that for audio. They say, you know what? Let's just treat it like it's a module, right? Or a pedal if you're a guitarist. That there's an in, an out, and you can connect any of the ins to any of the outs in any order that you want. And we're not going to worry about what it is that you want. Like here, instead of trying to do a plugin, I have to write, like with Mac or Windows, often you'd have to run everything inside of Pro Tools or everything inside of Fruity Loops, right? And then you'd add all of your plugins into your channel, or maybe subchannels or whatever down your line, but you have to work within the app. The app is Linux, right? So you can have one plugin running by itself on its own and run your ALSA modular synthesis into it. So you don't need to worry about, oh, I found this one cool app that has this one cool effect or this one cool sound, but I don't know how to get it to talk. That's what Jack is for, right? So the whole purpose of Jack and why they kind of rewrote a lot of the Pulse Audio stuff and replaced it with Pipewire is because, like with Pipewire, is adapting this idea that the things can all be connected, right? So Fedora is actually using Pipewire. It's people will say it's supposed to be compliant. It is. So under the hood, like Jack is saying, hey, ALSA, are you here? And Pipewire is like, yeah, I'm ALSA. Yeah, we're good. and it just worked, which is exactly what you want. You want it to just work for you. So just keep that in mind as you're like going through stuff, that all of the tools that you need to be successful are all there. It's just a matter of connecting those things together. And then you can do really wild things. Like you can, like I'll be honest, I am not really a keyboardist. I don't really play keys. Like I'm a guitarist by nature, but I always thought it would be cool. Like what would happen if I ran my guitar through a synthesizer? I don't know, like a modular synth. You can absolutely do that with Linux, and because it's there. And you don't have to spend, $3,000 worth of equipment to find out what it would sound like or what it would do. So just keep that in mind as you're kind of going through stuff. I'm going to kind of move on, but if there's any questions, please feel free to ask. But we're just going to kind of go over a few examples of what stuff actually sounds like running with Linux. Did anyone have any questions? No? Haha, good. Oh, yeah.
So a while back, I tried putting everything on just vanilla Fedora, and it didn't seem to work. I'm wondering, does the Fedora spin do something additionally to just make everything work?
So the question is there something additional that the Fedora spin does to kind of make everything work? So yes, yes and no. So I don't know how a while back ago was, but there were some issues with Jack and Pipewire a while ago that were more existent in GNOME than they were in KDE. So it could have been that if you're running GNOME, which is kind of like the default desktop. It could have very easily have been that. It could have, and if it was even before Pipewire, then definitely yes, because Jack really wants ALSA, and ALSA works great on KDE, and it's weird in GNOME, and it always has been. Even though Jack is like, yeah, we can work with whatever. Like, don't you want to use the other one, which I don't even like mentioning because it was awful. But if you were asking like, oh, what's the setup or what are the settings for? It says right here that Jack can do the port audio driver. It's you're gonna have a bad time. Right? It's the meme. You will. Believe me. You don't. There's so many people that don't like it. Oh, one thing I will say, I just remembered I didn't talk about this with audio cards. Going back, I know we talked a lot about USB and USB 3. There are technically two other ones. FireWire, very common. Super popular because it's ultra low latency. Like the latency is fantastic on FireWire cards. The problem is that it's FireWire, and like finding a laptop with FireWire on it anymore, I don't know. Good luck. Like I don't know of any. So you could do it like on a if you want to like lug around like a PCIe card or something like a tower, but that's a lot of gear to lug around. Like you're probably not going to want to do that. So So yeah, and then there's also like Thunderbolt, but Thunderbolt it's very fast. It's very, very fast. And so it can do lots of channels, which is good, but not necessarily low latency. And the stuff that is related for like audio things and getting it back and then having the driver working, mileage may highly vary. So just kind of a thought out there is, oh, it's more expensive, it must work better. Well, maybe not. Maybe not really. So yeah. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. And if you guys, sorry? This one is by Focusrite. It's a Scarlett Focusrite 4. The adapter. Thank you. The question, I needed a DisplayPort to HDMI, not mini DisplayPort, full-blown DisplayPort. But yeah, that's okay. So here we are. By the way, this speaker is here because the room is in mono, and there are some things that are definitely stereo effects, and I didn't want it to sound bad, so I brought my own speaker. So that's why it's here. And people who are listening online, I'm sorry, you can't hear the right channel. It's just how it is. So, right, this is called Simple Sound from Yoshimi, which sounds, I don't know, simple, right? Does it sound, do you guys think it sounds pretty pro? Maybe. Right? You pretend like it's not really an organ, but not really anything. So this is kind of like, most people like, they plug it in, they're like, all right, I have it. And I could use this on maybe 1 or 2 songs, but it would probably get a little old after a while, right? And so they go into the bank patches, and they're like, oh, soft piano. That's exactly what I need, right? So they start to play soft piano. Right? It doesn't sound like a piano, right? Right? It doesn't, it's not, that sounds like, I don't know, maybe if you're in like a, what's the Mannheim Steamroller, right? Like if you're in a cover band for them, it would be good. But not exactly, like a saw piano. What could that be, right? Oh, nope, we're done. So like how do we get from like these kinds of sounds to like something that's a little bit better, right? Something that's a little bit more. So a good example for that would be, like there's this thing called Carla, which basically is just, it's like jack and plugins. That's all it offers you, and it lets you save. So if we open up Carla, I've got a thing here that I think I just called test, maybe. And here, let me connect these because I didn't save it like I should have. I'm sorry. Connect these things to the SFizz, the extra one that we plugged in, right? And we'll plug the output into the output. Oh, come on. I know, because it's on this computer, not this one, and I don't have the adapter, and I'm sorry. We have here, this is I actually paid. Someone did a bunch of samples of a Steinway. It's called the Steinway in 162. And I think I paid a whole $1 to say thank you for this guy spending hours and hours recording the Steinway. And so when I did it, because, there's nothing wrong with paying for people who do good work. And so I paid for it, so you could too. So here is the Steinway close. So the mics were up close to the actual sound soundboard as he was playing. So remember the Carmina earlier, right? Right? Sounds like a real piano, right? Or here, right? Like, oh, I wonder if I can turn. Maybe I can. Maybe I can't. Right? Right? Sounds like a. You have all of that dynamic range within there, and that's because it sounds like a Steinway because it is a Steinway. So this is like that example of, don't just open up a random synthesizer, play the piano patches, and be like, it sounds awful. It's no good. You know what I mean? Like, dig a little bit deeper, go a little bit farther. Here's a Rhodes one that you can download off of the SFizz's site for free. It's a free one, but right. Right? Sounds like a good Rhodes. And the sustain pedal works, and it fades as you would expect it to, like an actual instrument would. It has that natural sound to it. So that's the kind of thing that you're looking for when you're doing. So like samples versus synthesizers, there's nothing wrong with synthesizers. If you're into chiptune, if you're into something else, great. There's tons of great synthesizers. But it doesn't all have to be like if you want a piano sound, if you want a Rhodes sound, like use a Rhodes, use a piano, use the piano that you're hoping for. Like here's that thing, right? So yeah, I'm gonna close this out real quick. I'm gonna open up another thing because we did talk about synthesizers. This one's called Synth V1. And the nice thing about the Synth V1, or about any of the synthesizers, is that, hang on one second, let me connect these. One of the great things is that any parameter inside of your synthesizer is mappable. So you can right-click on it often and say assign MIDI, assign this, assign that. So when you have like, hey, I want this knob to do this thing, 1000% possible. Like no coding needed. Like you don't have to write a script, you don't have to do anything, it's available. So it gives you all of those options that you want or you need, like right at your fingertips, right at your knobs for your performance, or whatever it is that you're doing. Is there any other questions before I keep playing stuff? That's not the one we want. Yeah.
How easy is it to get plugins for reverb and delay and things like that?
Yeah, and there are a bunch. Like there's a bunch like that are just available. So that being said, it depends on what app it is that you're trying to run the plugin in. I think there's a couple of things that will even run VST plugins as a standalone instance, but
You can run things from Logic or Pro Tools.
it depends. Yeah, so like we use Logic because that's a good example. You're locked in with Apple anyways, right? If the plugin is a .au, the audio unit won't work. If it's a VST, good chance it will. Like you can drag those over and it can make sense of the VST files and actually run those. So yeah. Yeah, so for those of you who couldn't hear, he was just mentioning that there's a couple of other of applications. It really depends on what VST and how they compile it. Um, I would liken it to kind of like running Windows apps through Wine. Most of them would probably work fine, but there's always the exception. But there's definitely some things that you can run to get it to work better. Yeah. Yeah, all right. So like this sounds very weird, right? So if that's something that you're looking for, great. But if you're looking for, oh, hang on. Most people, I feel like, as artists, would be like, I downloaded 10,000 presets and they all sound like this. And they get really frustrated, right? And they're like, why does it sound so bad? But really, it's just you have to know how to go in and find what it is exactly that you're looking for. To modify, right? So even if it's like this, to be able to twist, that's just the envelope filter, right? So you have it like real low and real mellow like that. And that may be all that you need. Like that you may just, like you're just gonna be playing in the back of a background. But you can absolutely do something like this and then like tweak, right, the resonance point as well. So that would sound kind of like, more like that. So whatever it is, that idea of what this gives you is like that circuit bending technique that you want to be able to go in and modify like in real time. And what's nice about Linux is that you don't have to go wire in something new to your Juno and ruin it to get it. Like it gives you access to all those different points of where it would be. Yeah, I think we're almost about done out of time. I'll mention this. If you're interested in recording your own things, I'll just give you these rules for like recording your own samples. It's better to have multiple recordings of the same velocity than it is to have multiple velocities as you're recording. So like the piano in 162, I think may only have like 2 velocities or 3, but there's 2 recordings, and the SFZ will randomly select. You can set, hey, 50-50, choose whatever sample, and that's what makes it sound more natural than having, pianissimo, triple P, double P, P, MP. Mezzo forte, double forte, triple forte. Like you don't need to do all that. Just do like soft, medium, just do 3, soft, medium, loud. But the more variations of that recording that you give, the better off you are. The other thing is you can do one of 2 things. If you want your samples to be smaller because you're worried about the footprint, like when you pluck a string, there's a natural rise and fall of the volume. Get at least 2 of those, right? Because what you can do is you can say, hey, here's the rise, here's the fall. Now go back and loop this other section and then pull off 3 dB each time, or whatever it is for that instrument for it to sound natural. But what's nice is that the SFZ files are all just plain text. So if you don't like something, you can go in there, select all, find, edit, replace, bump something, change something. It's really easy. So yeah, that's it. That's all I have. Any other questions? No? One more.
Do you use Ardour as your
Ardour? I do. That is by far my favorite DAW. I would highly, if you've ever used like Pro Tools before, you'll probably feel really at home with Ardour. It is, I think, kind of like the king of digital audio that's fully free. Free solution would be Reaper. There's a lot of people that use that. It's relatively cheap. So not totally free, but Ardour is also really great. Yeah.
What incentive do I have to buy a Steinway? Like how much better is sampling?
It depends, right? Like even like some of the, I've heard worse samples than this one that cost me $1, right? And so it really depends, and it also depends on like what sample rate you want to send stuff as. So like I know a lot of the samples are recorded in 44.1, but if you're running at 192 or 96, there's an offset of the sampling, and so it'll never sound quite right. So it's a 48 hertz would sound better at that point. So it depends on a lot of stuff. But like if you go out and record your own, it's just your time. It doesn't cost you anything as long as you have access to a Steinway. You pop the lid, put on 1,000 mics, all the mics you can, and I'm sure you'll get something that's usable. But how much time do you want to go through and sit there and be like, all right. The other thing is like with the Steinway, you don't have to sample every single note. You don't have to do all 88. The rule of thumb is to do a minor third, right? So every minor third switch. So your sample can go down a half step or up a half step, and then you switch to a new sample. When you start getting away from that, you can kind of stretch on some instruments to a whole step, but it'll start to sound weird, which might be what you're looking for in an instrument, but it won't sound natural. So yeah, another good rule of thumb for doing your own sampling. Yeah. Anything else? No? Well, if you want to come by the Fedora booth, I might set this up over there, and you can plop on a set of headphones and play around with it. But thanks all.